This is Ambassador Kosh coming to you from my humble abode. And today we're going to delve into one of my favorite decades within pop culture, the 1990s. And in particular today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite shows, and I'm sure it's a show some of you, if not all, many of you have heard of, that being Babylon 5. Now this show is set in the distant future of our universe. It's patterned a little bit after Star Trek, and in particular Star Trek DS9 or Deep Space Nine, for those of you who are familiar. And there's a little backstory behind those two shows, but other channels have covered it, and I will post a link to that video and everything in the description if y'all want to check that out. But for today, we're going to be talking about Babylon 5. In particular, we're going to be talking about Ambassador Kosh. And this will be an ongoing series. I hope you all do enjoy it. I'll be covering the characters, I'll be covering the show and storyline in particular, I'll be covering the different factions, alien races, and so on within the show. I hope you find it entertaining. So, anyway, we will begin, obviously, as I just said, with who was Ambassador Kosh, and more importantly, who were the Vorlons. The Vorlons were an ancient alien race that predated most, if not all, of the main races that inhabited the B5 universe during the run of the show. Those other races being, obviously, us, humans, the Minbari Federation, the Centauri Republic, the Narn race, and the other various alien races within the B5 universe. The Vorlons themselves were very mysterious, even within the show themselves, and a lot of the other books and so on that were published or anything during the run of the show and after. The Vorlons were part of a faction known as the First Ones. The first, and a little bit of background on the First Ones. The First Ones were a group of alien races, very advanced, very old, very ancient, and very, very powerful. Not a whole lot is known about the First Ones, except for obviously the Vorlons and their adversary race, and that wasn't always the case, the Shadows. And I will be doing another video on the Shadows later on down the line. But as for the Vorlons themselves, they were very enigmatic, they were very mysterious. They didn't disclose a whole lot about themselves, and there was a reason for this. And I will go into a little bit of it here in this video. The Vorlons had existed for most likely millennia before even the human race had even evolved, and much less any of the other races that existed within the B5 universe. We can most likely deduce that the Vorlons did evolve slowly over time. And eventually, once we get into the timeline of the Babylon 5 TV show, they had evolved to a point where they no longer existed in a corporeal or physical state like regular people do, like us and a lot of the other races and everything on Babylon 5. The Vorlons existed purely as energy. Now, they were able to maintain their consciousness, and they were able to maintain a personality of their own, but they were not like us. They were very, very other, very, very different. And that was one of the things that made them so interesting within the show itself, was the fact that if you want to draw a parallel between Babylon 5 and, say, Star Wars, they were much like an embodiment of the Force. We still don't know a whole lot about the Force, even within Star Wars canon or even any of the expanding universe material that we have. But stuff was hinted at, stuff was explained, but it was done in a very rushed manner, and what I'm going to try and do in this video is try and pull together all the information that was disclosed in the show and trying to give you a decent picture of who the Vorlons were, and in particular who Kosh was. The Vorlons, as I said before, did keep to themselves. They didn't interfere in the affairs of lesser races, the humans, the Centauri, the Narn, and even the Minbari, although they did have a closer relationship with the Minbari, and there is a reason for that. Within the storyline and the prehistory of Babylon 5, there was what was known as the Great Shadow War. The Shadows were another race within the First One's faction. And the First Ones and the Shadows and the Vorlons, they both had differing ideologies as to how they interacted with the lesser races and how they wanted to allow the younger races, I won't say lesser, I'll say younger races, because the younger races weren't as technologically advanced, they weren't as philosophically advanced, and so on, whereas the first ones, in particular the Vorlons and the Shadows, were. The Vorlons had a very dogmatic way of thinking and doing things. Again, if you want to draw another parallel between the Vorlons and the Shadows, you could, in essence, you could draw a parallel between the ancient Jedi and the ancient Sith within the Star Wars universe. The Vorlons, they kept, as I said before, they kept to themselves. They didn't interact a whole lot except indirectly, and when only they felt it absolutely necessary. They were very insular, except for, like I said, with the Minbari. And the reason that they had more of a close relation with the Minbari was because of the Minbari's part in the first Great Shadow War. And at that time, the other first ones, the other ancient races, they participated in the war against the Shadows and everything, because there was a philosophical divide that had developed between the Vorlons and the Shadows. The Vorlons believed that they should take a very hands-off, but still, okay, don't strike that. They believed that the lesser races should be allowed to develop and grow as they wanted to, but the Vorlons wanted them to be very orderly in how they developed. They didn't want a lot of strife, a lot of conflict in how they developed, whereas the Vorlons, they were much more chaotic, they were much more warlike, or they eventually came to that state of mind that they felt that the younger races should compete amongst one another to see who's the strongest and who should thrive and who should perish. Kind of along the lines of Darwin's theory of the strongest survives. The Vorlons did not feel this way, and they felt that sowing strife and causing war between the younger races wasn't good for them, because the Vorlons wanted every race to have an equal chance, but they wanted them to operate underneath the Vorlons' framework. And I'm going a little bit into the history between the Vorlons and the Shadows here. I understand this, but you can't have one without the other. But anyhow, as time progressed, within the Great Shadow War, the Vorlons, the Minbari, and the other first ones and everything, they were able to push back and ultimately defeat the Shadows, sent them into hibernation and into retreat, and the Shadows did in fact retreat back to their homeworld of Zahadum. And that's a whole other story, which will be covered later. After the first Shadow War, the Vorlons allowed the Minbari to advance. They gave them access to Vorlon technology. They helped them leap forward in how well they were technologically advanced. And the other races, in particular the Centauri and the Narns, they were smart enough to know you don't mess with the Minbari, and they pretty much, one didn't necessarily mess with the deal with the other, except for maybe trade and economic affairs, but that was very, very, very infrequent. For a long time, the Vorlons themselves and everything, they withdrew to their own, what they called the Vorlon Empire, their own territory, and they had their borders closed and secured. Any ships that tried to enter their territory and anybody that went into their space often did not return. Now, there are a few exceptions to this, and I'll go into those later on in this video. Now we're going to jump ahead into the Babylon 5 timeline proper here. And actually, the very first instance that we have interaction with the Vorlons is in the TV movie thing done in, I think, the mid-1990s when TNT, Turner Network Television, bought the rights to Babylon 5, started running the 4 previous seasons, and had requested a 5th season be done, and to launch that 5th season they wanted to do a TV movie. This TV movie was called In the Beginning, and it actually outlined another major event within the Babylon 5 universe, that being the war between between humans and the Minbari. The first time we get a look at a Vorlon within the chronological history of within the show itself is in this TV movie, when Ambassador Kosh and his, I want to say his fellow ambassador, counterpart, whatever you want to call it, who would later show up in, I think it is it's midway through season 4, another Vorlon by the name of Yulkesh. They appear to the Minbari, and they tell the Minbari that they need to end this war because humanity is going to be a major ally and a major part of the war to come, the next war to come with the Shadows. But the way that Kosh and Yulkesh interact with one character in particular, Delin, they don't tell her exactly what she's supposed to do, but they give her hints as to what needs to be done. As I said, they took a very hands-off approach. They didn't want to interfere in how the younger races operated. They didn't want to interfere in their governments and so on. So, but eventually, thanks to the intervention of Kosh and Yulkesh, the human Minbari war is ended. The next time we see Kosh and everything in the show is actually in the pilot episode, which came out before the TV movie did. And actually, the pilot is surrounds a storyline around Ambassador Kosh himself, where an attempt on his life is actually set in motion, and he is injured. Now, there is a little inconsistency here, because you have a being of pure energy, and within this encounter suit, and that's what you often see on screen is Ambassador Kosh's encounter suit. That encounter suit is the only way that the Vorlons could interact with others and keep themselves hidden, because amongst some of the other abilities, which I'll go into here in a couple minutes and everything, of the Vorlons, they had visited other worlds as they were developing, in particular Earth, Narn, and Minbar, and several of the other races that had ambassadors on the space station Babylon 5. And they had programmed, for lack of a better word, for each race to see the Vorlons as they wished for them to be seen. You could call it more like telepathic programming of a sort. To a Narn, a Vorlon outside of his encounter suit would look like, well, an angelic Narn, but it was something that was built up in their mythology. For us as humans, a Vorlon outside their encounter suit would be along the lines of, say, an angel, for example. And I'll put some links and everything to particular clips that show these scenes and everything in the description down below for y'all to have a look at. Anything if you are interested. In the pilot episode, Ambassador Kosh, an attempt is made on his life, and the Vorlons do get directly involved because it is one of their own that has been injured, and it is believed that the commander of the space of Babylon 5 was the one that perpetrated the attempt on Ambassador Kosh's life, Commander Jeffrey Sinclair. And he's a whole ball of wax in himself, and I will get to him eventually. 1 second. Long story short, Sinclair's clear of all charges is actually discovered that a rogue Minbari actually was using something called a changeling net, which is basically like a holographic projector that can make a person look like someone else. You want to draw a parallel with that, think of Security Officer Odo from Deep Space Nine, how he could alter his appearance to look like other people or take on other shapes, what have you. Or another good example would be Zam Wesell from one of the bounty hunters from Attack of the Clones, how she was able to alter her appearance and look like other people. This is just a technological version of that shape-shifting ability. Obviously, Ambassador Kosh's the attempt on his life is foiled, and his life is saved and everything by the doctor there on the station, a doctor by the last name of Kyle, if I recall correctly. But back to the Vorlons themselves proper. Some of the abilities that we do see within the TV show itself that the Vorlons are capable of just themselves. As I said, they're able to project, create telepathic projections of how others would see them. They also have, along with the they're able to communicate through telepathy. They also had, we can wager, very powerful telekinetic abilities, the ability to move things with one's mind. And so on. And they were able to manipulate energy fields of various types with relative ease as well. As far as technology goes, the Vorlons, they were obviously very technologically advanced, being they have been around for several millennia, several million years, if not longer. And their ships were very much based and everything on what could be construed as organic or techno-organic technology. Their ships were massive. They did, especially their battle cruisers and everything, for lack of a better term. They packed a lot of firepower. They were very resilient, and they were not a ship that you wanted to tangle with. In particular, Ambassador Kosh's personal ship was roughly the size of a mid-sized fighter, I think, within their own fleet. Now, the Vorlon fleet, it had roughly 4 classes of ship. You had your small fighters, and then you had your mid-sized fighters and everything, which is what Ambassador Kosh piloted and everything, and he only used it to go back and forth between Babylon 5 and the Vorlon homeworld. I think he didn't travel much anyplace else as far as we know. And even a Vorlon fighter of Kosh's ship's size and everything, it packed a lot of firepower as well. It could single-handedly disable, if not destroy, a Shadow capital ship. And then of course there was the 4th class. Well, okay. The 3rd class of the Vorlon fleet was their battleships, their battle cruisers. And they could pretty much one-shot just about any size fighter. There's a couple of instances where within the TV show, you see them take out a small Minbari personal transport and basically just one-shot it. There is a brief skirmish in I believe it's season 3 of Babylon 5, where you see an engagement between a small Vorlon task force and a Shadow task force. And the Vorlons ships are pretty much undamaged and everything within the encounter. They pretty much wipe the floor with the Shadows. Although that battle did come at a very heavy price, which I'll go into here in a few minutes. The fourth class of ship within the Vorlon fleet was their planet killers, and as you can imagine, it is exactly what it sounds like. It was a planet killer. It was almost like a mobile but more compact version of, say, the Death Star. Now the Shadows had their own version of a planet killer, but I'll go into on their side of things when I cover the Shadows in full in a separate video. The Vorlon ship, the Vorlon planet killer itself, it was obviously very destructive. It was designed to destroy worlds. But this was a technology that they had kept hidden from all the other races and everything, and were able to do so because nobody could enter their space and say, "Ooh, look there, there's a Vorlon planet killer, a pretty large Vorlon ship. I wonder what that does." When the Vorlons finally bring these ships into the battlefield, they did so with destructive effect. They destroyed numbers of worlds, and they had 2, if not more, of these planet killer class ships. 1 second. Now all that being said, as for the Vorlons themselves, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, they existed primarily as beings of pure energy. And one other thing that they could do, one of the abilities they could do that lent to the fact that they were beings of pure energy, is they could separate a portion of their consciousness or their energy form and place it inside a corporeal being, in particular within telepaths. And I'll go into the relationship between Vorlons and telepaths here in just a minute. Essentially, what a Vorlon would do is, if they had access to a telepath, they would basically just separate a portion of themselves, put them into the telepath, and just the telepath would carry them around. Now, there was no ill effects due to this or anything, because the Vorlon wasn't overtaking the personality or the consciousness of the telepath, or if it was just a normal human being, which in a couple of cases this did happen. Vorlons, if they felt that they were near death, they could separate a portion of their being and put that portion into a regular human being or another corporeal being. They could probably even do it with a Centauri, a Narn, or a Minbari. But more often than not, they prefer to use telepaths and everything, because telepaths allowed them to have a certain degree of access to their telepathic and most likely their telekinetic abilities. Now, within the in-world history of Babylon 5, it is speculated, and what is given or anything isn't a whole lot, but you take the guy who wrote the show and you take him at his word. The Vorlons or anything throughout history had planted the seeds of telepathic ability within certain races. The Minbari for one, humans, the Narn, although the Narn, sadly, all of their what they called mind walkers were killed in the first Shadow War. But and the Narn did try to rebuild their telepathic section of their species, but as far as we know, they were never able to. But this does lead to the idea that the Vorlons were able to manipulate organic life on a molecular level. Excuse me. So, another thing about the Vorlons that I kind of alluded to just a minute ago. Vorlons can in fact be killed. Their energy form can be damaged and irreparably damaged, and, well, for lack of a better word, they can be killed. But the only beings that would have an easy way of doing this, or have an easier time of doing this, would be a fellow first one race, in particular the Shadows, because within the run of the show, Ambassador Kosh is murdered by a group of Shadows on Babylon 5. The reason for this, do I want to spoil this now or do I want to wait? I'll wait. I'll just say that his death was not in vain and it was not needless. And granted, on the show itself, all you ever see of Kosh, except in a few stray instances, is his encounter suit, but they do give his death weight. You do feel for those that were connected to Kosh, and you do feel for Kosh himself, because he didn't have to die, but sadly he does die. Sorry about the car going by. But sadly, Vorlons are not purely immortal. They can be killed. They kind of have that similarity with the elves within the Lord of the Rings. The elves are essentially immortal. The only way they can be killed is in warfare. The same thing with the Vorlons here. They can only be killed by another being. They cannot naturally expire because they are beings of pure energy. Their energy form will not decay or erode. They won't succumb to disease or anything like that. They do exist pretty much indefinitely. Now, as for with the lesser races, in particular us humans, within the show, there does come a point within the show that the other ambassador that takes Kosh's place, Yulkesh, he is destroyed, but it takes a lot of firepower and everything just to damage his encounter suit, because the Vorlon encounter suit is extremely durable. It's not easily damaged, and it can in itself and everything, it packs firepower of its own. It allows the Vorlon to manipulate energy around it and use it as a weapon. This can be in the form of energy blasts, electrical blasts, possibly even telekinetic blasts, anything at Vorlon's adversary. We do see this in a limited sense and everything with Kosh himself, with another character within the show, and I won't spoil that part, but needless to say, Vorlon gives the other guy a little bit of a smackdown, but ultimately he does relent. He doesn't kill the guy, although if Kosh had been pushed far enough, needless to say, he might have. But he knew the importance of the other person, and he did not want the other person to die, but he wanted his point across that what's going on, what he's about to do, is going to come with a price. So, anyway, one other thing about the Vorlons that we do know, and this takes place in another TV movie called Third Space. I think it's roughly it's the second TV movie that's done by TNT, and it takes place in between the Second Shadow War and, I won't go into a lot of detail, but another war within the Babylon 5 timeline, the TV show timeline. The Vorlons, when they were still relatively young, but obviously very, very advanced, they had explored the length and breadth of our particular part of the galaxy, and they thought very highly of themselves. There weren't too many other races that could challenge them, nor would anybody really, because it seemed like it was a very live and let live time frame and everything, in which this particular story took place. The Vorlons constructed a device that essentially was a doorway into what was called Third Space, which is a parallel dimension adjacent to our dimension, or in the Babylon 5 universe, that main dimension. And unfortunately, the Vorlons stumbled across something that they couldn't necessarily handle. it was another race, a very exceedingly powerful, very ruthless race, even more so than the Shadows were. This race was extremely durable. Their ships were very durable. It took a lot of firepower just to knock out a small fighter. Anyway, but this structure kind of lends to the technological advancement that the Vorlons had. I mean, you look at their ships themselves; these were very impressive vessels themselves because they were technically techno-organic vessels, or techno-organic works. Leave it there. But this structure served as a gateway, and it had to have a lot of power pumped into it to open it. And what the Vorlons ended up doing was, once they were able to push back the enemy, I don't think there was ever a name given for the other race. They took this gateway and they buried it within the Babylon 5 equivalent of hyperspace, and just pushed it so far down into hyperspace that it couldn't be found. It was just by sheer dumb luck that the humans and everything and the people working on Babylon 5 actually stumbled across it, much to their dismay, obviously. Now, thankfully, they were able to, the humans and the other races that were aiding them in this fight with the other race and everything, were able to seal the gate and bury it again. But yeah, hold on. As Jeremy on Geeks and Gamers would say, drink for the working man. But that's pretty much all that we know from the TV show Babylon 5. I hope I've given you a pretty good background as to the race themselves, what they were capable of, why they were so interesting, so intriguing. Just speaking for myself, why I found them so interesting. I've always had a penchant within sci-fi to be attracted to the more mysterious aspects of a show. With Star Wars, it was the Jedi, the Sith, and the Force. With Star Trek, I was more interested in the prehistory of Star Trek, what the lead up was to the formation of the United Federation of Planets. With Babylon 5, it was the first ones, and in particular the Vorlons and the Shadows. And in particular, why I had such an interest in Kosh himself, and why I chose him as the title for my channel and my avatar. I felt he was a very intriguing character. I could relate to him, even though that may sound very odd. And the reason I could relate to Ambassador Kosh was he wanted others to make up their own mind. He wanted others to discover their own potential, and if he had to, he would give people a push for them to discover their own potential. And in a certain respect, I think, and this is my own personal opinion on Ambassador Kosh, I think he had a more spiritual aspect to his person than was ever really expressed or explored within the show. He had much more of a philosophical and maybe even a theological mind, because he had lived for so long. He knew so much that he might have been a little bit closer to how the universe started, what might have started it, and you might know where I'm going with this. He might have had a deeper understanding of if there was a supreme creator or a God that created the entire universe and in fact created himself and created his race. And that's why I chose Ambassador Kosh as my nom de guerre for my channel, because he bridges that divide between religion and science fiction. And this is what this channel is dedicated to, exploring my Christian faith, and Christian faith in particular, and the other side of myself. the geek, the nerd, the one that loves pop culture so much, loves Star Wars, loves Star Trek, loves Babylon 5, Lord of the Rings, all those things. And as it said in the opening, the intro to my channel, this is a place for us to explore and discuss our passions. Be that pop culture, in particular the 80s and 90s and beyond, or if you are a Christian, or even if you're not a Christian, if you're just a person of faith and you want to understand this thing called Christianity a little bit better, this is a place where you can come, and I will do my best to guide you in that pursuit. I cannot promise you I have all the answers, but I will do my best to guide you. But I won't, as Ambassador Kosh didn't, try to influence you. I will present you with the facts. I will present you with as best as I am able, and the rest is up to you. So until next time, my friends, and as Ambassador Kosh said so eloquently,